In the 1980s, Japan had the second biggest economy in the world, and economists were calculating when it might surpass the US's economy. But that never happened. And Japan's economy has mostly been stagnant since 1990. In this video, we'll be diving into why the country, which had one of the fastest growing economies, has been stagnant for more than 3 decades. So stay tuned till the very end. The rise of Japan after World War II. After World War II in the 1960s, Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi wanted to turn Japan into a military country once again, but the public heavily protested against it, and he resigned, with Hayato Ikeda replacing him as the next Prime Minister. Ikeda was the one who lit the spark that ignited the beginning of Japan's success by introducing the income doubling plan, having the policies to move the economy in the direction of greater international openness. Basically, the plan's objective was to double Japan's GDP in just 10 years and make it one of the wealthiest economies in the world. The country's economists were skeptical about the plan because it meant that Japan would have to maintain an average GDP growth rate of 7.2% for the next 10 years in order to achieve this, which was a really big ask. Surprisingly, the average growth rate from 1960 to 1970 ended up being approximately 10%, and the country doubled its GDP in just 7 years, making it the second wealthiest country in the world. Finally, the target of doubling levels of personal income was reached in a little over 4 years instead of the 10-year period that originally had been thought would be necessary. During the Golden 60s period, Japan was blessed with plentiful and highly skilled labor, making substantial progress in technological innovation coupled with the ideal conditions for growth. This economic development was based upon the 3 pillars: 1. Significant tax breaks, 2. Social security, 3. And public investments. But what really set Japan's rebirth in stone was when it hosted the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, indirectly declaring on the international stage that it had bounced back from its decline after World War II. And much of it was thanks to Japan's strategic location. Japan is among the world's most densely populated countries, and it's home to around 126 million people spread out over an area of about 377,975 square kilometers. This space constraint caused numerous difficulties as well as opportunities for businesses. Limited land had spurred innovative strategies for optimal space use. Cities in Japan are increasingly adapting tall structures and multi-level transport, demonstrating vertical construction and compact infrastructure to maintain large populations. Additionally, Japan has the 6th longest coastline in the world, 29,751 kilometers, which plays an important role in the country's economic growth. The country has become one of the world's foremost trading powers, thanks in large part to its commerce and maritime industries. Important international commerce hubs that facilitate smooth import and export operations include ports like Kobe, Yokohama, and Tokyo. The coastal geography has generated significant economic opportunities, which have fueled the growth of industries like fishing, seafood processing, and maritime transportation. But to say that Japan's location has only benefited the country would be untrue. Because of its location on the Pacific Ring of Fire, Japan is vulnerable to natural disasters, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Despite the serious dangers posed by these natural disasters, Japan has proven to be exceptionally resilient and well prepared for such situations. To guarantee continuity and safety, Japan's businesses have used cutting-edge technology, strict construction regulations, and catastrophe mitigation plans because Japan has suffered the most from natural disasters compared to any other country in the world. Designing structures to withstand earthquakes, installing early warning systems, and having backup power sources are all part of this, and it has helped Japan tackle these issues easily over time. Despite the advanced technology that went into making houses, Japan still has really affordable housing, but the reason might be different from what you think it is. Japan offers the cheapest housing among all of the advanced economies, but that's mostly due to the country's deregulated housing policy, and the fact that the country has been able to build about 1 million houses every year has kept the price down for housing. On the other hand, the lifespan of a building in Japan is drastically less than that of other advanced economies. The distinctive topography of Japan has permanently altered the country's economic scene. But despite all of this, Japan's economy flourished, and a reason for it was its tech industry. With groundbreaking electronics manufacturers like Sony, Panasonic, and Sharp, Japan dominated the international technology market in the 1980s. But many of Japan's once prominent consumer electronics titans are now struggling financially, and the country's tech environment has declined significantly over the years. The once feared Japanese semiconductor sector has fallen into oblivion after a period of dominance in the industry. Japan was home to 6 of the top 10 semiconductor businesses in the world in 1990, with industry heavyweights like Hitachi, NEC, and Toshiba at the forefront. By 2011, though, things had changed drastically, with just 2 Japanese businesses, Toshiba and Renesas, making the top 10 and 5 American companies prevailing. These Japanese companies' combined revenue was far lower than that of Intel, the industry leader. The country that was once decades ahead of the rest of the world is still manufacturing old flip phones while the world is competing for foldable screens. The harsh reality, as pointed out by Gerhard Fassel, founder and CEO of Eurotechnology Japan, is that Japanese electronics companies have been stagnant for the past 50 years. In the 1970s, it was like Japan was living in the future, something that many people still believe today. But the reality is that Japan is now living almost 3 decades into the past, as the economy has been stagnant since then. The fall of Japan's economy. In the 1980s, the global economy looked up to Japan in envy. While Japan's economy grew at an unprecedented rate during this time, it appeared ready to surpass the US economy as the world's largest. By the mid-1980s, Japan's standard of living had increased to the point that it was comparable to that found in other developed countries. However, this ambition was short-lived. The Japanese economy started to decline in the 1990s, when a speculative bubble that arose in the prices of stocks, shares, and real estate burst. After that, the country went into a lost decade, now multiple of long-term stagnation and deflation. The Japanese government and the Bank of Japan, or BOJ, have tried several stimulus measures to revive the economy and the currency, but they have all failed. The country experienced a serious recession at the end of the decade. In addition, Japan, like the rest of the world, was hit hard by the global economic recession that began at the end of 2007. In order to achieve near-zero long-term interest rates, the Bank of Japan spearheaded the implementation of quantitative easing, a policy that involves buying assets. The second Shinzo Abe government introduced 3 programs, dubbed Abenomics, to stimulate the Japanese economy in 2012 as a component of the stimulus package. Increased government spending, changes to regulations, and expansionary monetary policy were the instruments utilized to stimulate trade and economic growth. Though these steps averted a severe economic downturn, they failed to stimulate Japan's stagnant economy. The rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 worsened even Japan's economic problems. As a result, real GDP fell by 32% annually in the second quarter of 2020. The third quarter saw a 20% increase, and the fourth and fifth quarters saw stagnation. The fact that Japan's GDP remained lower than pre-virus levels even in the third quarter of 2021 is the most unfortunate aspect of this. Maintaining the economic recovery, rebalancing investments away from foreign lands back into its own economy, and resolving democratic concerns are among the obstacles that Japan's economy must overcome if it is to regain its previous glory. Japan's demographic problems. Demographics pose a long-term threat to Japan's social and economic stability. Beginning in the 1970s, Japan's birth rate began a steady decline, and as a result of the fiscal health of the nation, its social safety net and its public services are all threatened by this. The factors contributing to the declining birth rate in Japan include the declining marriage rate, an increase in the average age of those getting married, economic burden, childcare burden, later childbearing, and infertility. So the nation's production capacity has dropped since fewer young people are entering the workforce. Because there are so many retirees and so few young people, the dependency ratio is disastrous. That is the percentage of the working age population that pays into the national pension system as compared to the percentage of the population that receives benefits once they retire. As a result, Japan's Social Security Fund is running a deficit, which the government will have to pay for out of its own coffers. To address a deficit in the fiscal budget for 2022, for instance, the Social Security Fund would get 660 billion yen, an increase over the initial estimate of 480 billion yen. Japan has issued more debt to cover the shortfall. The country's debt-to-GDP ratio is 266%, the highest among developed countries. Nevertheless, addressing demographic concerns isn't an easy or quick process. It states that the present immigration regulations and economic structure of Japan necessitate massive change, since they make it extremely difficult for individuals to relocate to Japan. As a country that takes pride in its homogeneity, Japan has always avoided discussing immigration. There has been the greatest lack of workers in decades due to the country's elderly population and its chronically low birth rate, due to which Japan has started accepting more foreign workers into the country, and many have taken the opportunity to work in the island nation. And Japan can't sustain a workforce from within its borders either. Overworked labor for low salaries is a concern for Japan, particularly among irregular workers who are hired on a temporary or part-time basis. And a huge number of Japan's workforce falls into this category. Working conditions, job security, and access to social benefits are frequently challenging for these employees. There's a disparity between income and living standards because they typically earn less than normal workers. Some employees take on other jobs or use online services like Uber Eats to make ends meet. And so, as a result of being overworked, these people have less time to be home and have to think twice about having children of their own. Despite many challenges, the middle class and equality, which Japan regards as foundational to its social stability and cohesiveness, continue to sway in the country. Historically, Japan has had a reputation for being a middle-class nation where everybody has equal access to resources and income. The country also maintains its top rankings in human development, education, health, and quality of life, even though rises in inequality and poverty in the last few decades have cast a shadow on this reputation. But there are risks and uncertainties that Japan must face, and these can eventually undermine the social stability of the nation. The COVID-19 epidemic has increased worries about physical and mental health while also causing economic and social disruption. The pandemic has brought to light several systemic issues in Japan. These include the country's sluggish digitization, its rigid labor market, and its insufficient social protections for disadvantaged groups. Problems with Japan's security, trade, and diplomacy could arise from the dynamic regional and global environment. So, do you think Japan can overcome this stagnation and get back to the status it once held, or is it bound for failure? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps keep us creating the content.